Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this little bit of Hebrew today as we're continuing in Daniel chapter 12, and we're picking up at the fourth verse. So just reading from the JPS version, it says, But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. This is a really interesting verse because in the 45 years that I've been truly serving God and that He touched me and drew me into this beautiful relationship, this was a verse I have heard used for biblical prophecy of this running to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. And of course, back uh, in 1978, when God first found me, um, knowledge was at a quite a different level. And of course, this verse was talking about running to and fro, making reference to the busyness of society. Of course, this was in 1978, so things at that time seemed like they had increased in busyness from what we'll call the 60s and the 50s before that, the post-war era. And knowledge was on the increase after World War II. Well, now 46 years looking ahead or looking back, being ahead and looking back, um, uh, it can really be said that the frantic pace of life has increased and that knowledge has increased. And so the purpose behind, I guess, this understanding was that knowledge comes from God and that these would be signs of the end time. So let's see what the Jewish sages have to say as we look down here. It says, until the Messianic era, according to others, and this was again where we had looked at under Antiochus, shall run to and fro. And they say mentally, with a view to discovering the secrets hidden behind the words which are shut up in the book that was sealed. So they're looking at it from a um, insight of discerning the biblical prophecies that are being that were hidden here that Daniel knew about but wasn't able to talk about. So a little bit different viewpoint than what the Christian scholars had been looking at. Let's look at the Hebrew here. Looking at Bible Hub and seeing what that shares with us. Ve'ata Daniel Satom. Satom is the word shut up. And not like closing your mouth. It's just to be closed up or hidden, secret. Um, this is tied in maybe a little bit with the word sod, that is used in the study of Hebrew for the secret things that are to be earthed out or mined out when you study the Hebrew language. And of course, that's a very interesting topic in the Jewish culture. So it's Satom and then Hadavarim, the words. And again, it's using Davar for words from the heart, meaningful words, not Amar, which are sometimes thought to be words that are less intense, less meaningful. So these are very intense words, very meaningful words. The Chatom and seal, HaSefer, the book, Ad et Kates, until the end of time. And so nothing unusual about those words. Let's take a look at the word to seal. And this is Chatam, and talks about making an end, marking, stopping up. Um, so again, all has somewhat biblical, um, I would say mystical understanding. So let's just scroll down. It's the idea of finishing, of protecting, used for legal deeds, prophetic scrolls. Probably in those days, there would be seals and signets pressed in the wax to seal these and until the right person was able to read them, the one for whom it's intended. And so that's where this has a significance. And then the running to and fro. um, Yeshom tu Rabim V'tirbe Hada'at, and that's the word for knowledge. So noticing here that this word for running to and fro is in a PL form, which means it's intensive in its idea. So it comes from the root word of shoot, the sheen, vav with the shurik mark, and then the tet. And it is somewhat thought about to push. They're translating this as to push, or even to lash at the sea, like with a boat that you would oar and row, and you're making contact with the sea with the oars. Um, Talks about traveling. And so that was kind of interesting. This lashing at the sea with the oars gives you the idea that maybe this movement is not as defined, that there's struggle there, and that there's not efficiency in the movement. That you might even say that they're just flapping in the breeze. We would use that terminology. So here, according to the topical lexicon, this word shoot means restless movement of roaming, raging, running about, rowing, human activity that is can be industrious or futile. It's ascribed to satanic wandering. I think it comes from the book of Job, where it says Satan was wandering about, same type of understanding. Um, so this is interesting, but it definitely fits where we're at in our society, where we're at with what's going on in our world today. But that this was a prophetic verse um, struck me as I looked at it again. And then we get to verse 5, and but the Ra'iti ani Daniel, and I looked, Daniel, Vehine, this is, and behold, Shanayim, Acharim, two others, Omedim stood, Echad, Hena, on this side of the bank, Lispat, and then Or on the other side of the bank, Ve'echad, Hena, Lispat, Or. So there's these two people that he sees, and it's very interesting how he looks at how they're standing on the riverbank. One is standing on the riverbank, and it talks about, you know, what are these two doing, and what were they doing on the bank? So let's take a look back at the sages, what they would have to say. And here it says, Daniel said, I saw one on the riverbank and the other on the other side of the riverbank. And of course, they feel that these are two angels, the same ones that were mentioned before. But then we get the one on how these angels are clothed. And we see that in verse 6, that one said to the man clothed in linen. So this is interesting. There's two of them standing there, and one is talking to the other one clothed in linen, but it doesn't say what the other one who's doing the talking was wearing. So what is this about the linen? Why was it necessary to distinguish the person in linen? And just this week, I received one of the emails I get, and it comes from a Torah Hebrew scholar, Jewish scholar named James Kugel, and I just like his viewpoint. And he's talking about the Torah reading that's for February 28th. And he starts talking about the temple and those things that are going into temple. And this corresponds to the Torah reading that all the Jewish community follows. Every week they get a new portion, and this was from last week. But here, what I noticed, what's came out to me, is he talked about the priest's appearance. And he said, the priest's appearance makes one awestruck and dumbfounded. And so he's quoting a Jewish sage from the 2nd century before the Common Era, or would be 800 or 200 BC, and that Aaron's priestly clothing possessed a glorious splendor and a stunning appearance, a delight to the eyes, the very height of beauty. Before his time, there were never such things. And so the wearing of these, what I interpret as linen, seems to be connected in some way to the priestly clothing that was worn in the temple. And so here, that's very interesting. And of course, he gives the comparison to the first garments that God made for Adam and Eve, and how they this was kind of the start of these clothing, of wearing clothing, and how that transitioned into the special tunics, the garments of linen that we can find in the priestly directive on what they should wear when they enter into the temple. So this all has that significance of wearing this linen, and what it has to do with who's performing. So obviously, this one who's wearing the linen is in a more exalted status because he's wearing these special clothes. And so the other one was probably wearing something just not as nice. And so this one stood out, as we see in verse 6. Vayomer La'ish, and notice he calls it a man. The Hebrew scholars call them angels, but it's definitely La'ish, which is a term for a man, but a man that's of a higher status, one that's more refined, a gentleman, more of a proper, someone of renown, someone of importance. And it was clothed in linen. So it's havadim. Just take a look at that word as we close out our study here. It comes from the Beit and the Dalet. It's only a two-word root here, which is interesting. And it comes from the sense of divided fibers, which would be, these threads that they put together and make into linen. And again, the whole idea of linen in this time frame, it was costly to produce, required a lot of work to do. So it wasn't something that just anybody had. It was also noted it was of a cool texture, suitable for hot climates, and in temple sacrifices where they're near fire to keep them cool. So it's kind of interesting, and obviously set him apart and caused this one to notice. So with that, we're going to stop here at verse 6, and because the closing question was this man who was not dressed in linen said to the one who was dressed in linen, who was standing above the waters, which is another interesting term. Was he on the bank just above the water? Or why was this really necessary to have this mental picture of how he was standing? What set him apart from the other one? There's something about this man who really caused Daniel to focus on him, notice how he was standing, notice how he was dressed, and that this other man on the other side of the river says, "How long shall it be before the end of all these wonders?" And of course, that's the question we are all asking. And we're going to have to come back next week and take a look at verse 7 and see what this angelic being tells us. So thanks again for being a part of this study. I hope you find it rewarding and encouraging, and that you draw near to God through all these studies. That's our hope and our prayer. So take care and God bless you. Bye-bye.